It's Neil here, the host of a Vietnam podcast, and thank you so much for listening to this show. As you probably know already, this is a show where I share stories of people connected to Vietnam from here in Vietnam and all over the world, and even more so as we're in season 10 now, I'm sharing more and more of my own story as I've now been here for over 8 years. Over the years of this podcast, since we started in 2019, we've dived deep into the heart and the soul of Vietnam's vibrant modern culture, and also what really makes it such a special and, shall we say, interesting place to be. It's been really exciting to see a vibrant in Vietnam recognised more and more on the world stage, none more so than people like Sarah Nguyen in New York with the Nguyen coffee supply, which has just gone from strength to strength since we interviewed her, and so many other Vietnamese people around the world being recognised for their achievements. As you probably know, Vietnam is so much more than the war, so much more going on, and part of this podcast is to share these stories to show the real Vietnam. So I really hope that you've been loving these episodes, and if you want to dive deeper into our community of passionate listeners, then we have restarted our Patreon so that we can build a community of people, and we're calling that community the Bop Sao Dares. So if you want to become a Bop Sao Dare on Patreon, you can become part of something special. Not only will I be sharing exclusive behind the scenes content, giving you early access to episodes, we're going to look at having virtual and in-person hangouts, which we've done before, where we can chat about everything and anything you want, from the best spots to eat cum tam, is it true that the dirtier the restaurant, the better the food, where we can get cheap beer, good beer, craft beer, good cocktails, bad cocktails, and all the latest happenings in Saigon and across Vietnam. I want to give a massive thank you to Fiona and Adam Thompson, Tracy Wright, Dan Jones, Andrew Barry, and Brandon Thompson for being part of our community from the beginning. And these guys are now the coolest Bop Sao Dares that you can ever meet. So if you want to become as cool as them, you can choose a level that suits you. You can become a Cafe Suada, a Banh Mi, a Cum Tam, a Bun Tet Nung, or the ultimate level, you can become a Bop Sao Dare. So join these guys in our community, become a Bop Sao Dare today, join the fun with me, and let's explore Vietnam together like never before. So hit that link in the show notes and join my podcasting adventure of a Vietnam podcast today. Cheers! We were having dinner, we were having food, having drinks, having a good time. I chink the glass, ding, 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 to do a speech, and I stand up and I say, thank you very much everyone for coming, blah, blah, blah. We have something exciting to tell you. Welcome to another episode of a Vietnam podcast with me, your host, Niall Mackay. This podcast is all about sharing stories of people connected to Vietnam. And we've been doing that since 2019. And I've been so proud to interview people from not just Saigon, where I thought it was going to start originally, but all over Vietnam and all over the world, and share their story. Now, one thing I realized was there's one story that hadn't really been shared, and that was mine. So if you listen to enough episodes, if you get to know me, then you'll know my story, or you'll know little bits of it. But I realized that I've got a lot to share as well. So for this episode, I'm going to go back to the question, how did you end up in Vietnam? Because I get asked that quite a lot, especially when I meet people through podcasting or I meet new people. My wife and I, Adrie, who you've probably heard me talk about so much, and she's obviously a big part of my story, and she's going to be featuring on the podcast soon if I get my way. We've been together now for 13 years. Just had our 11th wedding anniversary, and we've been in Vietnam for 8 years. And the biggest thing we tell people is we came here for 6 weeks, and 8 years later, we're crazily still here. It's likely we'll be here for over a decade and even longer. So before I get into all the rest of those things I mentioned, like how do you get a visa? Why do we live here? Do we enjoy it? Let me share with you, how did we end up here? So Adrie and I met in Australia, in Melbourne. I was working there. She was traveling to visit her sister and travel around Australia. And we just connected and hit it off right away. Well, to put it correctly, I madly fell in love with her. Then, thank God, she fell in love with me and we've been together ever since. So we left Australia because of visa problems and jobs and things like that. And we were lucky that we were still just young enough to go to New Zealand. And so we got a working holiday visa for New Zealand. We instantly fell in love with New Zealand, as you would, because it is probably still the greatest country in the world. I absolutely love New Zealand and it is still home for me. And if and when we leave Vietnam, it will be more than likely to go back to New Zealand. So we were in New Zealand. We almost immediately applied for permanent residency because we were eligible to do that. And thankfully, we got permanent residency. And during that process, we came to Vietnam in 2015 just for a vacation. So Adrie's sister had moved here for a job. She was working with a major university and she'd only been here for a couple of years, but obviously a great chance to go for a vacation. So we came over for 2 weeks. We obviously started in Ho Chi Minh City. We saw the Mekong Delta. We went to Hoi An, Da Nang. We went to Hanoi. We went all the way up to Sapa. We did a trek along the mountains up there in Sapa. We didn't go up the mountain. And just overall, absolutely fell in love with the place. So as soon as we got back to New Zealand, the first day we went straight to the Asian supermarket where we could find rice paper and make our own spring rolls. We didn't realize it's one of those things. Have you heard that exercise where if somebody asks you to find items, can you think of items in the room of the color blue? And you look around and you can name them all. And then you say, did you see anything red? And you go, no, I never saw anything red. And you go, look again. And because your attention's been drawn to it now, you see all these red items in the room. It's all about where you put your focus, right? So really, really similar. We got back to Wellington. We'd been there for years and we actually had no idea there was several Vietnamese restaurants right within like a 1-block radius of where we lived. So we spent most of the weekend eating Vietnamese food, drinking Vietnamese coffee. I've shared this story on the podcast before. We went into one Vietnamese restaurant and they had ba 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 and we got so excited because we'd just been drinking lots of ba 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 when we'd been in Vietnam. Then we looked at the price and it was like 8 or 9 New Zealand dollars. And so immediately we were like, no, there's no way we're spending 8 or 9 New Zealand dollars on a beer that we just were spending $1 on. So we didn't get ba ba ba, but we did have lots of Vietnamese food. And I don't know the exact time, but not long after that, Adrie, who's the more adventurous one than me, she's the one that wants to travel more. And I'm so happy and delighted to follow her because I've told her this recently. I have massive inertia. I would probably just stay on the couch and do nothing. So thank goodness for Adrie. She gets me out of my comfort zone and gets me traveling. And she said, look, why don't we save up for the next year and we'll go to Southeast Asia. We've never really done it. And we'll do a proper trip. We'll go around as many countries as we can afford to. And so that was the plan. So we spent the next year in New Zealand. We were only going out for happy hours. We didn't really go out and do as much as we'd been doing before. We had a budget. We saved. And through that year as well, we decided that we were going to do our ESL teaching certification, which was the CELTA, which you could do in New Zealand, but it was way more expensive. And so we decided to do it in Vietnam. So after a year, we put all our stuff into storage. We moved out of our apartment, said goodbye to our friends. We said, right, we'll see you in 6 months or a year. We'll be back soon. And we left for Malaysia. No, sorry, we left for Thailand. So we obviously arrived in Bangkok. Sweltering humidity, 7-Elevens on every corner, smelled kind of bad. But oh my goodness, the best Thai green curry I'd ever had in my life. Cheap beer. And we had a couple of days in Bangkok and then we continued down south, went to like Koh Lipe, Koh Lanta, went to the Similan Islands. We did a livable diving trip and just everything you could imagine, like beautiful white sandy beaches and just so stunning. So we did a month in Thailand. Then we crossed the border. We went into Malaysia from like the north of Malaysia, went into Langkawi, did the Perhentian Islands, went down south. And I achieved something that is still to this day one of the proudest moments of my life. So my grandfather had been a policeman for the Malaysian police very, very randomly. So back during something called I think it's called the Malaysian Emergency, they were advertising for British police officers to come over and work in Malaysia. And so my grandfather decided to do that to save up enough money to come back and marry his fiancée or maybe girlfriend at that time, but future wife anyway, my grandmother. And he was a policeman in a place called Slim River. Now, this is not a tourist destination at all. It's barely a destination at all. There's one train station there. There's one main road. But it was always my intention that when we went to Malaysia, that we were going to go visit Slim River. And we did that. And I called my grandfather. I was like, you know where I am right now? I'm in Slim River. And so that to me was just one of the proudest things ever. So that was amazing. So we did Slim River. Obviously, then we got to KL, did Malacca. And so this is not a podcast about Malaysia and Thailand, but we did all of that. And then we came to Vietnam, and we had registered to do the ESL course, so the CELTA, which I don't know if we did or we didn't realize, but it is like the gold standard of English teaching certifications. And so it's really intense. You have to we were doing it full time. So you may basically put aside 1 month. You cannot do anything else. You can barely go out and hang out with your friends. You can't work. You can't have a job. You can't socialize really much, as I mentioned. You just have to dedicate yourself to this, and you have to have a degree to do it, which is something that frustrates me when ESL teachers talk themselves down, or people talk down about ESL teachers, or they say, oh, I'm just an English teacher. Every single English teacher in the school that I worked at, which was ILA, already had a degree in something. So you have a degree, that is incredible. And then you had to have a CELTA. At the time, it's changed now. They've lowered the entry barrier, but at the time you needed a CELTA, which was the gold standard of teaching. So these people were highly qualified, and we did the course. We arrived in Vietnam, obviously caught up with Adrie's sister, went out for more ba 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 and banh mi, reacquainted with Saigon. We were used to the heat by now. At that point, we were still backpackers, so we didn't have many clothes, so we had to go out shopping. There wasn't the same amount of stores that there are in Saigon now, and I talk a lot about how Saigon has changed so much, and that's one of the things now you just take for granted, that there's a Muji and an H&M and a Zara and a Mango in nearly every mall. 8 years ago, none of them existed. So if you wanted to go out and get some teaching clothes like we did, it was really, really difficult. And we spent a few days going all over the place, all different shops, getting clothes made, buying clothes to get stuff ready for the teaching course. And so we did the teaching course, spent 4 weeks, intense training, but we met some amazing people, many of who we're still friends with to this day, even though they might have moved across the world, and just had an incredible time. So this now is one of the biggest moments, I guess, in both of our lives. I see it as a sliding doors moment. So we finished the course, and when you finish the course, you could get back, at the time, not anymore, you could get back 50% of the course fee if you took a job with ILA. There was also like a signing on bonus. There was a completion bonus. I think there was like a mid-contract bonus. And we'd obviously just been traveling for a couple of months. So we basically had spent all of our money. We've been traveling now for over 3 months, not had a paycheck in about 4 months. And even though we'd saved up a lot of money, our money had gone down considerably. And then suddenly there's this offer on the table for all this money. And again, there's 2 of us, right? So you double it. So it adds up to like thousands of dollars. So money was a big consideration, but not only that, and Adrie loves to point this out, which is really accurate, we didn't feel like we were finished with Saigon or with Vietnam. So even then, Saigon was bustling and growing so quickly. The craft beer scene had just started to explode, which obviously we love craft beer, as we've talked about many times on this show. We just felt like there was more to do here. Some of those friends that we'd made on the course were staying here as well. And I remember we went to the Bitexco Tower, which I've barely been back since. We went up to the bar, because this is a big tip. You can spend money to go to the viewpoint, which I can't remember how much it is, or you can just go to the bar and buy a drink. And the drinks are ridiculously overpriced and expensive, but it's half the price of the viewing tower, which is literally like 2 floors above. That was 8 years ago. I don't know if it's still the same, because I know Bitexco's changed a lot. But if you are going to go to Bitexco, look into that. I think it's cheaper just to go to the bar. But anyway, we went to the Bitexco bar with a bunch of friends from the course. And some of them had decided to stay. Some of them were going to do the contract. Some of them had already made the decision that they were going to leave Vietnam. But we had a decision to make, like literally that night. We had to decide there and then, because we'd been thinking about it, where are we going to stay in Vietnam and work for ILA and teach English to children, something that we'd never done before, because in the course you're teaching young adults and old adults. Actually, it was just adults. You must love podcasts if you're listening to this. Do you want to start your own one, or you already have one? Then follow Smarter Podcasting to get expert advice from me, Niall Mackay, the podcast guy. Since 2019, we've worked with over 40 podcasters, produced over 700 episodes, and helped many podcasts get to the top of the Apple Podcast charts. And right now, I'm offering you a professional edit for just $27. Click the link in the show notes. And we just went back and forth. We thought about the money, we thought about the experience, and eventually we made the decision that night, okay, let's do it. We'll teach you ILA. We won't sign a full-time contract because you could sign a part-time contract. And if you signed the full-time contract within, I think, 2 months, then you were eligible for all the bonuses, right? So we signed a part-time contract. We started teaching. We were placed in District 7, which we were living in at the time. So that worked out well. I think we moved to District 7 because we got placed there, or vice versa. I can't remember. But we were working in the Phu My Hung ILA. Now, I remember going into my first class, probably spent hours planning it. I've worked with children before. I love kids. Wasn't too nervous, or maybe I was, I can't remember. But I remember just not having a clue what I was doing. I mean, I had a plan, I was following it. But you know, the kids, they've been going to ILA for years, some of them, so they knew the routine. And then you've got to go in and pretend that you know the routine and teach them English, something that we'd never done before. And I clearly remember I went into the bathroom on the break and I sat on the toilet seat was down. I sat on the toilet with my head in my hands. And I was like, should I just leave? Like, honestly, like, what if I just run out the door? What if I just go and don't come back? I'll just tell them, like, I'll forfeit all the bonuses. I can't do it. I don't want to do it. I was so close to walking out that day. But, you know, I'm not a quitter. Picked myself up, went back into the classroom for the second half. Second half went well, managed to play a few games. And I was like, right, that wasn't so bad. I can't remember Adrie's experience on the first day. I definitely don't think it was as bad as mine, but I do remember one of the first weekends we had to work. I'm pretty sure she came home in tears one day, and she was working with the really young kids, like the 3-year-olds. I was working with the 10-year-olds, I think, at the time. And she was in tears and so much planning going into it, and was just something that neither of us had ever done before. But thankfully we persisted and we ended up absolutely loving it. But that, obviously before that deadline came up, we signed on for a full-time contract. So when I say to people about how long we've been here for, I say we came here for 6 weeks, which is pretty accurate. There was 2 weeks before the course, and the course was 4 weeks. Maybe one more week, then we were going to go. Depends when you ask me. Sometimes I say 7 weeks, sometimes 8 weeks, sometimes 6. But generally it was about 6 weeks. That turned into 2 months, 3 months, because we did the part-time contract, and then we signed on for a year. And we absolutely loved it. It's crazy. We had to work evenings and weekends. We went out and partied a lot. It was kind of like going back to your college days a little bit. People in ILA, they're all kind of young in their 20s. Obviously, alcohol's really cheap here. There was a really good vibe in this center, so everyone hung out together. We'd finish work on a Sunday night, go out drinking. Sometimes they would stay out. I don't think we stayed out all the time, but they would easily stay out till 6 a.m. without a problem. And then you'd have a couple of days off. You'd sleep in late because you didn't need to be up in the morning. So it's just a completely different lifestyle for that first year. You're not really eating healthily. Don't think we were going to the gym much in the beginning. Maybe eventually we did. But just what an incredible experience. So we're coming up to the end of the year and we thought, right, we kind of like this teaching thing, so let's keep doing it. But we didn't at that point really want to stay in Vietnam. And so we started to look further afield, and we're saying, where can we make the most money and the best lifestyle? And so we looked obviously all over the world, kind of focused in on the Middle East because the Middle East pays really well for English teaching. But we didn't want to go to Dubai or Saudi Arabia or anything like that, which is really oppressive to women. You know, obviously being with Adrie, didn't want to have that. And so we settled on Oman. And Oman was the least conservative of all those conservative countries. So it was still conservative, but not to the extent where a woman couldn't drive a car or had to walk about with a hijab on all the time or cover her face, things like that. We looked into, of course, if you can buy alcohol, you could buy alcohol, but mostly in the Western hotels. So there was a few places where you could go out and have beers and socialize. And if you don't know anything about Oman, it's like long and skinny and it's on the coast. So on one side, you've got the sea and the beach. And then on the other side, you've got mountains where you can go hiking, you can go quad biking. So it looked like a really, really fun place. So we were set on that. But the biggest problem was in the Middle East, you basically needed at least a minimum of 2 years teaching experience, and we obviously only had one. So that really, when I talk about we came for 3 months, 6 weeks, 3 months, 1 year, then 2 years, it's really true. We were going to leave after that year, but then we realized we needed the teaching experience for 2 years. So we said, right, let's do 1 more year. Plus we love it here. Obviously Adrie's sister's here as well. And we made a lot of good friends. So it was quite an easy decision to stay for that extra year. And we were making okay money. It's not the best paying job in the world, but we were doing some like kindergarten where you could get paid time and a half. We were doing lots of hours. The worst part was working on the weekends. We couldn't do fun things. There was always like a taco fest or a pizza fest or a pool party that we couldn't really go to, or we could only go for like a couple of hours in the middle of the day. But, we still had a great time. And obviously people like Peter Seal, I don't know if I've mentioned him in the podcast before, Sandler Ernst, he's been on the podcast before, became really close friends with them, lived with them, lived in the same building. And just generally made like really, really good friends and had an amazing time in Vietnam, able to travel a little bit, especially within the region, go to Korea, travel within Vietnam as well. So obviously absolutely loved it here, and we're able to save a bit of money as well, which was nice. So getting to the end of our second year, and if you're still listening, thank you so much for listening. Getting to the end of our second year, we were about to leave. We had started to sell some of our stuff. I remember Adrie had sold a bike. We had already put in our notice to move out of our apartment at the time. We told all of our friends we were leaving. Because of the different hiring seasons, they didn't hire in the Middle East until like February. And I think now at this time was like October, November. Adrie might completely correct me. She listens to all my podcasts. She's my number one fan. And she may be listening to this and go, Neil, it wasn't September, October, but I'm sure it was. Because what we were going to do was then go to Thailand, or I think it was Thailand, and just basically chill on the beach for a couple of months and start to apply for jobs, because they didn't actually start hiring until January or February. I may have the months wrong, but that plan is definitely exactly what happened. And so we were getting closer to a leaving date. We'd actually organized a leaving dinner with Orica, her husband, all of our friends at the time. We'd actually organized a leaving dinner with Adrie's sister and all our friends. And so we were going to tell them we were leaving. Now, during this first 2 years, I had been helping out a lot with the ILA community network. So my background is in fundraising. I got to Australia as a backpacker. I ended up doing street fundraising for 4 years, became a manager. I somehow became one of the best in Australia at it. And then when I got to New Zealand, I ended up working for the local rescue helicopter charity, then a cancer research institute, doing different types of fundraising, not street fundraising, like community fundraising, corporate fundraising. And that was my passion in life. Like, I absolutely loved that. I'd spoken at conferences, been published in magazines. So that was always something that I'd wanted to go back to do. But right now, teaching was something that I loved as well. So we were ready to leave Vietnam. I think we'd maybe even handed in a notice to ILA. I can't remember exactly. When, as that happened, an email came round saying that Rob Haggett, who was at the time the ILA Community Network Manager, and sorry, I think I missed a step out there. The Community Network was basically ILA's corporate social responsibility arm, or charity arm, right? So they would help give education to disadvantaged kids. Teachers would volunteer in orphanages. They would raise money and then give that to charities, because they weren't a charity themselves, but then they would support charities like Blue Dragon in Hanoi, Saigon Children's Charity, SOS Children's Village is one, just to name a few. And I would help them on advice and on events, because, that was what I did. So the email came around saying that they were advertising for the community network manager's job, which was Rob's job. And it always had been Rob's job. And in my mind, it would be a dream job to have, but it was never going to happen because it was his. And then we were leaving. So I messaged Rob right away and I was like, hey, you're leaving? And he's like, yeah, I'm hoping that you're going to apply for this role. And I was like, sorry, man, we're leaving in like a month. So I won't be able to apply for it. And he's like, that's a shame. I was really hoping you would apply for it, get it, take over from me. And I was like, sorry about that. So again, another sliding doors moment happens when I get home that night and I bump into Adrie, or I meet Adrie outside our building, and we go up in the lift together. And I say to her, did you see Rob's job got emailed around? And she's like, yeah. Are you going to apply for it? And I remember my reaction being like, no, of course not. Like, we're leaving next week or next month. We were so close to leaving. Like, we'd started selling stuff. And she's like, that is your dream job. Like, you need to apply for it. And I was like, what? She's like, look, and again, this is just a small reason why I love Adrie so much. She said, look, apply for it. If you don't get it, doesn't make a difference. We just continue with the plan that we have. If you do get it, well, we can then sit down and talk about it and make a decision. So I applied for it, and sure enough, I got the job. So we had to have a conversation, and it wasn't too much of a difficult decision, was that we were going to stay in Vietnam. Now, if you remember, we'd already made plans to have a leaving dinner with all of our friends and family here to say goodbye. So we went for dinner, and I think it was at Chan Bistro, I think. Again, Adrie will correct me. I need to get like a correct... Adrie, I'll add her in afterwards with all the corrections. But I think it was Chan Bistro. And so we all went. We were having dinner, we were having food, having drinks, having a good time. I chink the glass, ding, 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 to do a speech, and I stand up. And I say, thank you very much, everyone, for coming, blah, blah, blah. We have something exciting to tell you. We're not actually leaving, which was a shock across the room, and people just didn't really believe us. And then I explained what happened with the job and that we were going to be staying. And so that was it. We decided to stay. I got the job as a community network manager, which really was my dream job. And Adrie, coincidentally, also applied to be a teaching coordinator, and also got that job, of course, because she's amazing. And so that was a promotion. And she also got placed at the head office, which was also where I was going to be working from. And so instead of traveling to Thailand and then going to Oman, we took a month off. We traveled around Taiwan, and forgotten now where else we went, but we went somewhere else, I think, as well. We took a month off, and then we came back, and we both started on new roles at the same company, but for me as the community network manager and Adrie as the teaching coordinator. So that's part one of how we ended up in Vietnam. I realized that I've been talking for over 20 minutes and I've only covered the first 2 years of why we ended up in Vietnam. And so you can start to understand why it's such a complicated question when people say, how did you end up here for so long? And our life has changed so much within that time. So tune in for the next episode where I will share, I guess, up to the pandemic. So the next 2 years, because those first 2 years, we really were like backpackers. We came with a backpack. I remember having like no clothes to wear when we went out somewhere. Maybe one nice shirt, one pair of jeans. I would wear my hiking shoes out. We tried very much not to buy anything, including clothes, obviously. We didn't buy an oven. We didn't buy any physical things because we wanted to be able to just pack up a backpack and leave, which is what we were about to do after those 2 years. But then we decided to stay. We had full-time jobs. We had weekday jobs for the most part. Adrie still had to work on a Saturday. She had Sunday off. And it was that decision that led to the creation of 7 Million Bikes, a Saigon podcast, which later became what you are watching or listening to now, a Vietnam podcast, and 7 Million Bikes became something completely different. And I'll tell you more about that in the next episode. So thank you again for listening to a Vietnam podcast. Honestly, I cannot tell you how much it means to me. I still find it weird that I'm doing this right now, that I'm going to publish this and that you're going to listen to it. I find it weird that so many people have tuned in now. We're just about to hit 75,000 downloads. We're going to cross 100,000 downloads by the end of the year. The YouTube channel is getting more and more viewers. Creating this podcast has changed my life, and we'll cover that in future episodes about how that happened and how I've ended up and we've ended up in Vietnam for so long. But if you do enjoy this, if you enjoy a Vietnam podcast, then do what everyone says. Please rate, review, subscribe, turn on the notifications. Even though we're going to hit 100,000 downloads, I still want to grow this bigger and better and reach even more people and share these stories. And the biggest thing that you can do to help me is share this episode with other people that you think might enjoy it. And if you do enjoy it, we do have a Patreon again. I've restarted the Patreon. And it's going to be different. I want to build a community of people who love Vietnam, whether they live here or not. They love this podcast. They love hearing about it. And I want to bring those people together in a community, and Patreon allows that. And just by giving a little bit, you can give as little. I think the minimum level is like $1 a month or something like that. Give something small just to be part of that community, to show that you like this podcast. And then within that community, I'm going to share bonus episodes. I'm going to share episodes early, and we'll do special meetups as well here in Saigon and even online where we can bring people together. Because if you know me at all, one of the things I love the most is bringing people together. And if we can do that through this podcast, then please look on the 7 Million Bikes Patreon, then look on patreon.com, a Vietnam podcast, and you can become a Bop Sao Dare. That's the name we're giving to the people who join. The music for this podcast is unbelievable. Again, thank you to Lewis Wright for doing that so many years ago, 2019. The Bop Sao Dares, they are special, special people. We already have Fiona and Adam Thompson, Dan Jones, Andrew Barry, Tracy Wright, and Brandon Thompson as well. So thank you so much to those guys to be a Bop Sao Dare. You can be a Cafe Suada, you can be a Banh Mi, you can be a Cum Tam, or the ultimate level, a Bop Sao Dare. So if you want to help build the Vietnam podcast community, do that, and please share this podcast. So thank you very much for listening. Have an amazing day wherever you are in the world and whatever you are doing right now. Always please feel free to get in touch because I absolutely love hearing from people. Have an amazing day. Cheers. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're like me, you may use your laptop at places where you have to use public Wi-Fi. This opens you up to digital snoopers. It's a massive problem. It can be your internet service provider, or you know who, looking at what you do online, or a cyber criminal trying to steal your bank passwords or credit card info, or even a hacker at the next table trying to steal your sensitive data. These days, it is vital that you keep your data safe. NordVPN keeps all of these snoopers away. It makes your internet activity private, protects you from accessing dangerous websites that are phishing for your data, and lets you enjoy your favorite content securely, even while away from home. And it's easy to use, even I could use it. I've actually been using NordVPN for years now here in Vietnam, and I'm excited to be an affiliate partner with them. I've used NordVPN to watch Netflix, BBC, Disney Plus with ease. And I also know that my information and data are safe from prying eyes, whoever they may be. Join now and you'll get 68% off and 3 months free when you go to my link, nordvpn.com/SMB. Just again, for those hard of hearing, nordvpn.com/SMB. The link is also in the show notes. I know nobody checks them out, but go check that out and you can get the link from wherever you are listening to this podcast. As an affiliate partner, it also means that I will get a small commission when you sign up, but at no extra cost to you. So not only will you be getting a great deal through 7 Million Bikes, you get a great VPN and you'll be supporting 7 Million Bikes podcast. Stay safe online and enjoy the shows you love. Any questions, just let me know. You know how to get in touch with me. And thanks for listening to this show. Cheers.